Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope all of you are okay. Now I want to do something really special. I'm going to share a brief history about a church that has been the foundation of my Christian faith and also one of the many churches that I fully love and respect, the Clapton New Testament Church of God. Why am I doing this? Well, first of all, on the 4th of April 2024, the Clapton Church celebrated 60 years since they moved in to their current place of worship. And of course, like many other churches, there is a lot of rich history. When it comes to a church that has a lot of rich history, I would ask myself, where do I begin? However, I would trust God to help me through this. Alright, I'm ready. I want to really acknowledge the small group of brethren who remained loyal to New T after the division in 1963 and leaving the Scout Hall on Bouvier Road, which is not far from the Stoke Newington train station. Without your loyalty, the Stoke Newington New Testament Church of God would have dissolved, and of course, eventually, there would be no Clapton New Testament Church of God. So I really salute those who passed on and those of you who were part of that group and still with us today. Let me also mention a church sister by the name of Sister Harvey, who opened the doors of her house for fellowship and church meetings before a permanent place of worship was found and bought. And I'd like to mention the road she lived on, Lansdowne Road in Tottenham. I'm very familiar with this road because many years later, my grandma lived on the same road, not far from Tottenham Hotspur's football stadium. And of course, we thank God because not long after relocating to Lansdowne Road, within that same year, a particular church building was privately put up for sale. And I say privately because, first of all, at that time, this church building was owned by the Baptist organization, and they will only sell it to a religious group and not publicly put it on the market for people to turn this church building into factories or anything else. So it's as if God had a plan for the Stoke Newington church group. And that brings me to another special recognition. Brother Ebenezer Reed, who offered his own house as security against the bank loan to secure the purchase of this building. This is huge because back then, even to rent a house was difficult, even a bedsit or a studio flat. So for a migrant to own a house and have the right price value to secure the funds, who could it be but God? He made a way. And furthermore, let's not forget the church brothers and sisters who sacrificed their time and their wages to help repair and clean the church, and also those who spent time in prayer and fasting. And of course, it's the prayer and fasting that carried the church for 60 years, and it's the same fasting and prayer, trusting and believing in the same God who will take the church beyond 60 years. And here is the special photo, the first congregational photo with our first national overseer, Dr. Oliver Lysite. The first time I saw this photo, I was amazed, and I was glad to point out where Dr. Lysite is standing in this photo. And even for him to be available on that day makes it special. This congregation included brethren from another church building, St. Luke's Hall on Morning Lane, who joined permanently. And another reason why I'm glad is because I took the opportunity to take a photo of this board, or I could call it a huge plaque, in the foyer. It says Stoke Newington New Testament Church of God. It says, "This building was rededicated to the glory of God on the 4th of April 1964. Now, because this board was very high up on the wall, I had to zoom in for the tiny letters. Okay, it was rededicated by the then European Supervisor, Reverend V.D. Hargrave, then State Overseer, Reverend O.A. Lysite, then State Secretary, Reverend S.E. Arnold, and the then host pastor, Reverend R.L. Kennedy, Clapton's first minister. Jehovah was our helper. Jehovah is our helper. Jehovah will be our helper. In other words, we serve a God who never changes. He is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. God is a good God, and through him we shall conquer the unconquerable. Now, I would strongly agree that Stoke Newington / Clapton, like many other churches across the country and across the world, will always be known as a mother church, or perhaps other people will refer it to as a spiritual maternity ward, where over the years it has given birth to many ministries, many leaders, and many servants for God's kingdom. Let me start with the fact that this church has given birth to 2 administrative bishops, Clapton's second minister, Dr. Jeremiah McIntyre. As you can see, he became our administrative bishop or national overseer from 1978 to 1984, and his successor, Dr. Selwyn Arnold, who I was told a former church secretary at Clapton. Reverend Olive Paris, who was not only Clapton's first assistant pastor, but Clapton's first female assistant pastor. She eventually went on to start her own church, the Latter Rain Outpouring Revival Church. Basil Mead, his Christian roots and musical background began during the Stoke Newington era. In fact, it was Pastor Kennedy who taught him to play the guitar, and Pastor Paris who developed his skills in playing the guitar and piano. He went on to become part of a musical group called Kanos, as you can see him standing in front of Joe Edwards. And then, of course, he went on to be the founder and director of LCGC, the London Community Gospel Choir. And let me give a shout out to my dad's cousin, Ennis Langdon, who joined the choir much later. He used to attend the Mile End Church, now Apinos Ministries, where he used to be part of the worship team. Sister Dorel Trotman, who was crowned National Singing Queen back when national youth conventions were held at Leicester, the Montfort Hall. I was told that they used to have talent competitions, and there was an occasion like this where she represented Clapton Church. And to this day, she is still singing in the Clapton Adult Choir. The late Brother George Brown, who served our church on a national level as National Youth Choir Director, especially during the De Montfort Hall era. Wow. Imagine conducting a choir of this size. Reverend Phyllis Thompson, former Clapton District Youth Director and former Associate Pastor at Apinos Ministries, Mile End. She went on to become our National Education Director. The EBI Ebenezer Bible Institute, London, was held at Clapton Church, where a lot of ministers and other people were trained in the southern region of England. And as you can see, the range of courses that were part of the curriculum: English O-level. For those of you who don't know, That is the predecessor to GCSE, General English, Psychology, Typing, Old and New Testament Introduction, Church History. I think if I was around that time, that's the course that I would take because I love church history. Homiletics, which is the art of preaching and writing sermons, Christian education, music, and home economics. And it's very interesting to know that Pastor Brooks was the principal of EBI London as well as the senior pastor of Clapton Church. And I think the person beside him, Ben Cunningham, was one of the former pastors of the West Croydon Church. If I'm wrong, please feel free to correct me in the comment section below. Before I conclude this history review, I would like to share some interesting photos with you. With regards to the EBI Birmingham, there are two particular ministers that really caught my attention. A very young Pastor Robinson at the front and Pastor Parkinson at the back. Thank God for Facebook, because that's where I got this photo from. It was really interesting to find out that they were both roommates while studying there at EBI. If I can remember Pastor Parkinson's interview at Northampton Church, I think I can remember Pastor Robinson, who was in the crowd, mentioning that Pastor Parkinson was 1 year above him, and also Pastor Parkinson always had the top bunk in the dorm room they were sharing. The first thing that caught my attention in this photo was Pastor Robinson's hairstyle. Another interesting fact about these two ministers: Pastor Robinson served Clapton as senior and district pastor for about 20 years. Meanwhile, in South London, Pastor Parkinson served the Brixton Church as senior and district pastor near enough the same amount of time. And I think Bishop Parkinson stepped down to look after his wife, and Bishop Robinson was transferred to the Willesden district, his final pastorate, for a further 7 years, and retired with his wife, Faye Robinson, in 2022. And I had the privilege to attend on the Saturday night and Sunday morning of the special retirement celebration. This is one of the photos that I scanned from my uncle, Alfred Allen, an album containing quite a lot of old Clapton photos. Anyway, as you can see, this is a photo of Pastor McIntyre playing the saxophone during his time at Clapton, and I've heard quite a lot of stories, especially when he used to play some renditions before delivering his sermons. So after seeing this photo, my mind went back to this photo, the pioneers of NTCG England and Wales, and I thought that there's a huge possibility that the saxophone on the table could belong to him as he's standing right behind it. Also, it's even more interesting to know who owns Pastor McIntyre's saxophone. A very familiar person to us, Bishop Eric Brown. I don't know if he's ever played it, but it's still interesting to find out where this special instrument has ended up. It's always great to see ministers and other people represent your local church and district on a national level. I was told that all the ministers during their time at Clapton also served on the NEC. Here's a photo of the National Executive Council, and I'm not sure what year this was, but it could be during Pastor McIntyre's era as admin bishop, the late 70s, early 80s. And as you can see, there's Pastor Brooks as an NEC member during his time at Clapton. And it's also great to see his successors, Pastor Peterkin, who transferred from Willesden to Clapton, and Pastor Henry, who was transferred from Sheffield to Clapton. Even in this photo, you can just about see Pastor Brooks at the back, Pastor Peterkin, who is also at the back, and Pastor Henry among the ministers at the front, with Dr. Lysight as admin bishop. In this photo, you can see Bishop Parkinson, who was National Youth Director at the time, with the National Youth Board and the district youth directors across the country. And there you can see Joanne Bent, representing the Clapton district as District Youth Director. And once again, you can see Pastor Robinson, who was part of the National Youth Board. It was very interesting to find out that the Myland Church used to be on the Brixton district. And as you can see, here is the evidence. Myland was one of the churches that was birthed from Brixton. Mother Beacon, I believe, was their first minister. And even though Mother Beacon was before my time, I am familiar with her daughter, Cynthia Spence, from the Handsworth Church, and her granddaughter, Simone, who I usually see on the national worship team. Small world. And the Myland Church, known currently as Epinos Ministries, has been part of the Clapton district since 1975. I'm personally amazed to know that my parents, Moses and Jean Langdon, represented the Clapton district when they were singing in the New Tea Gospel Choir. It's always great to hear the stories about when they went on tour with Bishop Eric Brown in Germany, and when they made an appearance on the old gospel program on Channel 4, People Get Ready. Now, the most important fact that will always amaze me is the amount of ministers, soloists, choir directors, and many other people who served God's kingdom in many other capacities. And I have a list of examples to share. Starting with the ministers: Bishop Wayne Perkins, Reverend Gillian Anderson, Reverend Desmond Reed, Reverend Andrew Simpson, a minister in music, soloists: Marcia Walder Thomas, who was the guest psalmist at Clapton's 60th anniversary on Sunday morning, Tracy Riggin, Dorothy Allen, Carla Jane, who conducts the NTCG National Choir, and I think she conducts the National WDM Choir as well. And one final example on my list, Mrs. Sonia Grandison, our National Women's Discipleship Ministries Director, and the wife of our National Administrative Bishop, Bishop Cleon Grandison. Just one more photo, and I promise this will be the last one. This is a photo of Bishop Ronaldo Brown, who was the administrative bishop at the time, and other ministers laying hands on Pastor Henry. And I think this is during his send-off appreciation service. Now, what makes this photo interesting is that if you look closely, one of the ministers is Pastor Robinson. And I guess at that time, it would have been too soon for anyone to know who the next pastor will be. I'm only guessing, but it's really interesting to find out that Pastor Robinson was there at the service. And furthermore, I was told that Pastor Bailey, who's standing behind the pulpit, was among the short list of ministers to take over at Clapton. But eventually, the role of senior pastor and district overseer went to Pastor Robinson, who turned out to be our longest serving senior pastor and district overseer for 20 years. And so, as I conclude this video, there are so many groups and many other individuals that were birthed in the Stoke Newington era and the Clapton era. How can I forget The original four, the very first group from the Stoke Newington era, who eventually produced the CD, House of Gold, they were an a cappella group, and there were another group called the Veltones, and from watching the old 40th anniversary DVD, they were singing from 1979 to about 1988, and it was great to see them minister on the Thursday night of Clapton's 60th anniversary. And it's great to know that, like many other churches, Clapton is still producing more ministers and many other workers and talents for God's kingdom. In recent years, Clapton has given birth to a couple ministers, Reverend Kadisha Brown and another minister who was promoted to the rank of bishop, Bishop Eustace Constance, and most recently, Reverend Andrew Bruce and Reverend Viola White. For me personally, it has been great to be part of this church for 20 plus years, a church that has also given birth to other New Tea branches, the Hornsey Church, the Wood Green Church, the Slough Church, Seven Kings and Walthamstow. I know that these last two churches may not be in existence anymore like the Hornsey Church, as they may have amalgamated with some other churches or other New Tea branches that still exist today. And there is one thing that I want to do before I finish. It's like a mini challenge. Here are the 7 ministers, including the current minister, Bishop Spencer Anderson. 5 of these district pastors were also district pastors of the Willesden district. Can you name them? If you were listening carefully, I mentioned 2 of them earlier. Anyone with good knowledge of Clapton's history and Willesden's history. The answers are Pastor Kennedy, Pastor Brooks, Pastor Peterkin, Pastor Robinson, and Pastor Anderson. And here are Willesden's district pastors, including their current district pastor, Bishop Jonathan Jackson. At the top left corner, it's great to know that Clapton has so many connections with New Tea branches across the country, and even in this example with Willesden Church. Please forgive me if I've missed anything out. There is so much to mention with a church full of rich history, but I hope you did enjoy what I did put together. Thank you for your patience and your free time. And finally, thank you for listening.